I grew up in a super small town right outside of New Orleans, about 50 minutes outside of New Orleans, called Hammond. I grew up in a very rural area, first generation college student. Our city was barely, we had one high school, one junior high. And so for the most part, like getting out of Hammond was like your only goal. And so I definitely grew up in a small town, but in a very close-knit family. So I attended Louisiana State University, LSU, for undergrad, and then the Kennedy School in Boston for grad school. In undergrad, I studied journalism, so mass communication journalism, and I had a dual degree, so also had a degree in history. And so when I was in college, I thought I was going to be this historical film documentary legend and like merge my journalism and history degrees together. I had a lot of different plans, and so life has definitely morphed into something else. Yeah, so I started my first business when I was really young, and this was like, Facebook had just kind of got off the ground. People were still on Facebook without a face. Instagram really wasn't a thing. It was really just taking off. Twitter was like, a lot of celebrities were starting to use it. But I started my first company at 22, and I didn't know what I was doing, right? But I felt like I had a good enough skill set that I could start something on my own. And I think a lot of that also drives back to just like being confident about your ability to not only learn something, but to then execute on it. And so I had a lot of hiccups along the way because I had to really grasp and understand not only how to run a business, how to start a business from nothing, right? And so I didn't come from a family that was like, here's your business, just don't break it. I had to create it from nothing. And so I did. And along the way, it was definitely challenging, and it's still challenging as a business owner, second time business owner. When I first started my first business, oh my gosh, so many different things. Okay, so first of all, you have to ensure that your business is legally sound, right? And so I always tell people, when you file an LLC, know what comes along with that, know what comes along with, filing your taxes and ensuring that you're paying people correctly, whether they're W-9 or W-2. And there's so much that you need to know about that. And that's like the foundation of starting a business. But then you move on to, okay, I need to now go after contracts, right? And so for us, it was myself to begin with. I started going after contracts, my first contract, second contract, and then it put me in a space I had to hire people. And so wanting to, one, hire people, but also go after opportunities that were worth your value. And so starting off definitely undercut, the value of what we probably should have been charging. But it's like when you're trying to get people in the door, you're just like, okay, if anything sticks, let's do it. And that puts your business in it can definitely turn your contracts upside down. And so having upside down contracts where you're doing all of this work and you're not really making money from it. And so I had to really learn quickly like how to monetize business and how to make it make sense. Because I always say, if you're not in business to make money, then what do? You start a business to make money. And I had to tell myself that, right? Like, this isn't a passion project. Like, you need to ensure that things are going accordingly so that you can get paid, right? And so that then you can hire people to do things that they love to do and work with you to build this company. And so we had definitely a headaches of, going after contracts. I always say we were like a triple threat, right? So I was a Black female, I was young, and then I was a woman, right? And so I had all these three things going against me. And even if I had individuals across the table with me who weren't that much older than me, they didn't look like me. And so some of the barriers that come along with that were definitely, days where you're like, oh man, what am I doing again? Like, should I even be doing this? And that's a challenge within itself, and working through that, just mentally working through that. I felt like I had nothing to lose. And I mean that very literally. My mother had just passed away when I graduated college, and I started my company 6 months after my mother passed away. And for me, it was like, I had spent so much time wanting to create this life so that I could help my mother, because I felt like she just missed out on so much and she had given so much to her children. And so when she passed away, I really had to reframe what it was that I was living for. And I had the opportunity to, consult with a individual who was drafted 3rd overall in NBA. He and his mother were interested in starting a foundation. And so that's kind of how I really got my business off the ground, is that through that one opportunity, but then also believing in myself enough to take it. Because I think a lot of times we psych ourselves out of opportunities as well because we think we're just not ready. I launched SGI to the public, officially started SGI in July 2009, but we didn't actually make it public, right? And so I always tell people, as soon as people have an idea, they be announcing it to the world. I'm like, make sure it's something you want to actually do, because you'll look up a year later, you didn't move on to something else. And I always say that people remember, right? And so a lot of times, man, people don't support me. I was like, well, you come every other year, you got a new idea. It's is this the one? If this is the one, all right, we're going to get behind it and roll with it. But it wasn't until 2011 that I actually launched it to the public and had an official launch event and announced, this is our brand, this is what we're doing. But we were just very quietly working and going after opportunities up until that point. And so SGI was definitely, so many lessons. I made money, I lost money, I had bad contract deals, I had to fire my own clients because I was like, this is not something I want to do anymore. And when you're first starting off in a business, you feel like you can't turn down work, right? And particularly work that's paying you well. And so I think that when we really caught our stride, it was no, we don't want to do this anymore, and we're not going to do it. We're not going to work with you. And I think that was just not only a refreshing moment, but it was a moment where I kind of okay, I'm coming into my own as a business owner, and I can take opportunities that are meant for me, and the ones that aren't, I can leave them on the table. I have made the conscious decision to build my companies out of Louisiana, where I'm from. And when you do that, you have to be really intentional, because everything else is it ain't meant for you to be here. It's you need to go somewhere else because you can move faster. You can do this. You have more people backing you. One of my mentors, I was frustrated just about some of the support that we weren't receiving. And I was just man, I don't need another award. I don't need to be on another 40 on the 40 list. Cut me a check. Give me these contracts. You don't have to, I don't want to be the face of your campaigns or your diversity platforms. Either you're going to show up or stop ringing my phone, right? And so I had to have that conversation with a lot of people, that I was just no longer going to, my success is because I lined up all these opportunities in state and out of state. And so it's important that cities and other states that are not these mega cities understand what it means to keep talent in a city or in your state, and how you have to support entrepreneurs who are willing to stay. And so that was definitely something that was challenging for me. Although we have an office in New York now, it's a sales office, but both my companies started there. We'll always have an office there as long as my companies exist. And I think that anyone who has stayed in their hometown, my mentor referenced a biblical scripture that was basically something to the extent of you can't be the king in your own land. And I think that is something that a lot of people feel, that they are accepted and appreciated when they leave where they're from. And I think that's a part of that is people watching you grow up, right? And so when people get to watch you grow up, they kind of always see you as a child, and they always see you as like this struggling entrepreneur trying to get off the ground, and it's hard to flip that switch. And I think that it took me a long time to like flip that switch. But when we did, it became we couldn't be denied. It's kind of crazy because like my first company, for me, the idea of like raising capital just wasn't something that did, right? Like you went out, you got contracts, you bootstrapped the company, and you grew it by getting more contracts and more work. And so the idea of raising capital didn't come into play until I started my tech company. And for me, I'm like, dang, like all the headlines care so much about how much money you raised. And I'm like, I care about how much money I made, you know? And people didn't care about that. And I was like, I've made way more money in my companies than I've raised, but people care more about the headline that I raised money. And I think like that's something that we probably need to have like a longer conversation about as just society, about like priorities and like what really matters and what really should get the most attention. And so when we announced that we had raised capital and we had all these headlines and we had like stories that went viral, I was like, and people was like, oh, where you came from? I was like, I've been doing this, you know, like people were really like, you came out of nowhere. And I was like, no, I've been out here working for almost a decade. It's like, just because you take notice, like people just don't fall out in the air. You know, people have been out here working and behind the scenes and just minding their business and doing the work. And so for me, it was definitely one of those things where I felt like I had to now like use my platform to kind of tell like my story. So it wouldn't just look like this idea of like, oh, you raised all this money and bam, you kind of like blew up because of that. As a CEO, founder of a company, I think I start my day by literally just trying to get my mind right. Particularly if I'm going into a Monday. I think like that Sunday evening, a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners in general who are like just coming up, they have anxiety on Sunday night because they know they're about to start the new day. And so I think that for me, it's definitely been one of those things where been very intentional about, okay, you know, I started doing meditation and, you know, my friend introduced me to guided meditation using like this Muse headset thing. And so being very conscious of my energy and like the energy that I receive and give out is something that I'm just more mindful of. Just being positive and looking at like the glass half full, which can be like challenging, particularly in business when you have these ups and downs. And being like very focused on like my health and trying to eat as, you know, good as possible, considering that I live in New Orleans where we literally live to eat. So yeah, I think it's just like getting in and trying to stay in the right mindset. And like that's like the biggest thing that entrepreneurs, it's like such a lonely journey, particularly if you're like myself and you don't have any other founders or partners. I think for women, we just have to really be mindful about who we are and not let people try to test us. You know, like people just try to test Black women so much, like in so many different areas, arenas, people that look like us, you know, people that don't. It's just so many different things that come our way. And I think that we just have to like just stay grounded and then also not let our self-confidence be shaken. And I think like it really starts there. Like as soon as somebody like knocks you off your game, like you just lose your confidence. And like regaining that can like take a long time if you're not mindful of people just like chipping away. Because you'll look back and you'll realize some of the issues that you've had really stemmed from the fact that you just lost your confidence somewhere along the way. Being an African-American woman, and it's really interesting that you say African-American because like in tech, there's like a divide between African-American and African. And it's something that if you go in like chat rooms or Facebook groups that we talk about like underneath, you know, behind closed doors, but it's really a thing. And I think that if you're out in Silicon Valley, etc., like in tech specifically, it's definitely this undertone that Africans are smarter than African Americans. They work harder, they do better, and it kind of aligns like that. And even if you look at who is raising capital, and also the individuals who are running funds that are Black as well. And so as an African American woman, it definitely adds a couple of layers from, just being African American in general, but then also you open up the other gates, right, of who you have to compete against and how people look at you in the competition. I remember someone asked the investor that I was sitting on a panel with, and he was like, oh, what would you say to founders coming to you about like disparity or like issues that they may have and with their confidence? And he was like, oh, well, we don't get anything. I was like, what? Please. No, sir. I was like, first of all, as a Black woman, when you come to an investment table, just know you already have like 2 knocks against you. And so from that position, from 2 points down, you have to catch up to even level then to begin. And so I think that that's something that has been the case. And like some people are like, oh, like people are always like pulling the race car. People are all, no, like I know this for a fact that it has been a real situation, a real issue. And I think that I'm more comfortable on speaking on topics because I have had success despite it, but I know what it looks like. And I know that I have faced like many challenges because of the way that I looked and how people perceive me and their own, whether it was conscious or subconscious biases around, who I was and what I could do. And so, yeah, I think that in general, African American women, Beyonce said it best, in Lemonade. It is what it is. It's so important. So a friend of mine sent me like this meme, and the meme was basically saying something to the extent of women support women until they see you as competition. And he's like, oh, I know you feel this. I have definitely felt that, right? You have people that are like so about women empowerment until they see you as competition, right? And then it kind of gets thrown out the door. And so because I have like faced issues like that, and also I've been like championed by so many women too, I'm just super mindful of not being the other person, right? That blocks women's blessings, that feels like I can only be the only one at the table or at the top, or the only person that gets to shine, or the only person that gets the introductions. And so I've been super mindful about ensuring that I connect with women and women of color, and being really intentional about how I can like help, and do my part. And so yeah, I'm pretty mindful about it. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm a huge believer of ownership. I believe that as with anyone that wants to like create some type of legacy and leave something behind, that you have to like just own your space. You have to own the opportunity. You have to own your businesses, your content, like all these other things that people could generally like take away from you if you don't. And so as an entrepreneur, I definitely kind of maneuver with that belief, and the belief that I've not only learned a lot along the way, but it's like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, and then what, right? And so it's like, what's next? Once I've done X, Y, and Z. And so, Robert F. Smith just basically gave $40 million worth of scholarships or grants to pay off Morehouse class of 2019, like all of their loans as a commencement speaker. And so he's like, oh, I'm going to pay off the entire class loans. Like, that's legacy, right? That's like ownership has gotten him the ability and giving him the platform to be able to do that, right? And so for me, it's looking to the future and seeing like, I've put in all this work, what is it for? And I think about that a lot along my entrepreneurial journey, at least. In general, so really inspired by like Melody Hobson, because she's just like a beast. So Melody Hobson is definitely someone that I look up to because she's just like a beast in her space. She's a numbers woman, right? And so being able to not only get things done in finance, but she manages and oversees like billions of dollars, and she has done so much on the charitable side, but she's just so low key, right? And someone had posted something about, oh, they're always trying to evolve and stay relevant. And I was like, when you're a Melody Hobson, when you are a Robinson, you don't have to evolve to stay relevant. You just are relevant. And so it just goes back to like letting the work speak for itself. For me, I've never been like a vision board girl, although technically we tried to do something like a vision board-ish situation at the end of the year, like with my friends, and we kind of always go on vacation like right after Christmas leading into the new year. And so we'll write down like what are our goals for the year, like what are we trying to accomplish both personally and professionally, and what do we want to achieve, and how do we continue to look back on those goals and like redefine or pivot, how have things changed, and how do we continue to move in the right direction. And so I think like that's something, like writing things down, but revisiting your goals as often as possible to see where you are in alignment to those things and how things have changed. And then also like mentally, like where you are, right? And so to think about, oh, where was I mentally at the beginning of the year versus in 3 months and, today. And so I think it's important for us to also have like that type of mental health check as well. When I released my book, which I did on my birthday, people were like, I didn't know you were writing a book. And I was like, yeah, it's something I decided to do because I always get so many like inbound messages related to really my first company and like how do you bootstrap a company, and what are the things that people don't tell you. Because a lot of times with social media, a lot of people are digital marketers, right? And so they're trying to sell like a product. They're trying to sell something to someone. Downloadable, whatever the case may be. But I come from the world of like contracting, right? And so I come from the world of these people that you're trying to get money from aren't on Facebook, they're not on social media, they're not active, or they might have a couple hundred followers, right? And trying to get people to realize that there's like a whole nother world outside of like selling a product online. And not saying that you could definitely sell products online, because you can be a consumer driven, you can have a consumer driven business. But I come from this B2B enterprise space, and I honestly don't want our generation to lose sight of it. Like there's so much money in government contracting, there's so much money in private and public sector, and I don't want us to get so caught up in consumer products, trying to sell these one-off products to consumers who are fickle, that we miss out on the trillions of dollars that everybody else is getting, and that's what they want us to do. Y'all go play with the products online. And we can go over here and get all these contracts from these multi-billion-dollar agencies and companies and corporations, and trillions of dollars that's being put out in government contracting. And so I just wanted my book to be representative of that, because that's not what people are talking about on social media. That's just not the name of the game. It has, even more so than I thought, because first of all, I didn't put any type of marketing strategy. I was like, I'm gonna write a book and release it because I need to like just get this information out to the public. And it was originally supposed to be like a downloadable, and then my friend's like, oh, you should really just like publish it and make it a hard copy and like keep this as like one. Obviously, he's like, oh, you should write another book. Later down the road, I'll write a full book of like my life story, but I just wanted to like really get out just some information that I felt was very impactful and useful on how I started my first company. Starting a tech company was so different than my first company. And when I started my first company, it was about, again, like bootstrapping, getting off the ground. But tech is a whole different other game, right? And so you're building software, and it's expensive. So tech is expensive to build. It costs a lot of money to build. And that's why you see those people trying to raise capital, and also like the challenges that Black women face, and even women in general face in raising capital, and the disparities there. And so like what I would tell someone who's looking to get into tech is, one, begin by going to, conferences and like meeting people. Like you just really want to put yourself in the space and the ecosystem to meet as many people as you can and begin to like learn about tech. Google is easy too. You can start there and figure out some basics and understand the language, right? There's like a different language in tech. When we talk about, KPIs and what's churn and traction and what does that mean? What does a deck be? How do you get a minimal viable product to market? And you have a lot of these like different VC funds who actually put out blogs One of my favorite ones is in the SaaS space, which is my sector, Jason Limpkin with SaaStr Fun, and he just released like all the questions that he received, he put it into like an ebook and he gave it away for free. And so like that's where I would tell people to go. What would I tell my younger self? I would tell my younger self that it's not going to be anything like you expected. And I mean that in the sense of how big your dreams become, the things that you're going to be capable of doing, the places that you're going to go, the people that you're going to be able to meet. It's just not going to be like anything you ever expected. So, enjoy the ride.